continue with coverage around Eskom. ActionSA and the UDM have dragged Eskom to court. They want health and safety sectors be exempted from rolling blackouts. Now, an affidavit by Derita shows how government and former Eskom CEOs contributed to the country's electricity crisis. Let's hear the legal implications of that affidavit with legal expert William Booth. Mr. Booth, thank you very much for your time here on eNCA. Just first of all, let's talk about what the political parties or the opposition parties can do any further in terms of Derita now having resigned as CEO or being fired as CEO before his time. Surely they can still continue to have him as one of the respondents?
Yes, definitely so. So he's filed an affidavit in court proceedings in which he has dealt with in significant detail with the whole Eskom situation, but in particular with regard to corruption and sabotage, which, has led to billions being lost by the state. We've also had state capture. That inquiry found that corruption at Eskom with regard to tenders and other related aspects has amounted to billions lost to the state coffers. So he, in his position as CEO of Eskom, he had certainly an obligation to Parliament could possibly subpoena him to appear in front of a relevant standing committee investigating the whole Eskom debacle. He also could technically be subpoenaed to give information to a magistrate as to any criminal activity that he has information of. I think everybody wants this corruption stamped out, the sabotage stamped out immediately, and one needs evidence to do that. So, that evidence to a large extent would come from Mr. Derita, if I read his affidavit correctly, and his knowledge would then help with regard to the investigation. At the same time, there is still an investigation ongoing with regard to the findings that came out of the whole state capture inquiry.
And I mean, Mr. Booth, looking at some of the things that Derita says in his affidavit, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to read it, but for instance, he mentions 7 colleagues that he got evidence from. And, I'm just interested to know, in terms of all these colleagues and now having an interim CEO in the form of Khalib Karim, whether or not he might also suddenly be added as a respondent. Is there still time for these political parties to add more people as respondents?
Yes, they could. They can apply to court to join certain people as respondents in a particular matter. So that's an application that will have to be done to court, and it will have to be explained why they weren't joined initially. And the court can obviously look at what is in the interest of justice, what is fair, and then make a ruling to have them joined. So, it's a question of how do you stamp out this corruption or the sabotage? You need evidence. Criminal cases need to be opened. And at the same time, one must also consider what are the implications of somebody coming forward and laying a criminal case. Is there protection for that person as a witness? We know there have been threats made against Mr. Derita. We know some witnesses who've come forward as whistleblowers have actually been killed. So, that whole aspect is problematic. Witnesses must be encouraged to come forward. But if they're going to be threatened and their lives are in danger, they are going to be very, very reluctant to come forward. But Mr. Derita has already disclosed in a detailed affidavit in court proceedings his views and information that he has with regard to, corruption, sabotage, and these billions that have been lost as a result of a corrupt situation at Eskom.
All right. Now, looking at the developments around this entire story and what Mr. Derita said on national television, particularly our channel here on eNCA last week, all those allegations against a certain minister, he didn't mention names, but of course, it's a reputational damage really to the African National Congress, but also to the country when you look at the international world. Now, one of the responses from the governing party was that they would take him to court. On what grounds would they be able to do that? Maybe defamation?
Well, look, then the individual person, and if his name has been mentioned, would be able to go to court on, as you say, defamation. I don't necessarily think the party can, because, specifically he may not be saying it's the party, but that there's a member of the party or a member of government, a member of cabinet, who has committed certain irregular activities, has committed corrupt activities. So, he needs to say exactly who that is. But again, there's always a risk. The threats that are there are very real. But he's already said it. He said it on TV when he was interviewed. He's made these statements in the affidavit with regard to this corruption. And, the only way to stop all of this is to have people effectively and properly prosecuted based on evidence. So people who do have evidence must come forward with that evidence, lay criminal complaints, and obviously have the matter investigated by top investigators and prosecutors so that the case doesn't, fall apart, that it's properly dealt with, presented to court. So that those who have caused this and have created state capture in South Africa are brought to book. Why did the whole inquiry take place? It was there to gather evidence as well. So you've got individuals, you've got the evidence that we've given in the state capture, you've got individuals like Mr. Derita, and my view is obviously they must come forward, but they must be protected. They must be able to freely speak their mind with regard to issues and obviously present the facts to court without feeling intimidated or threatened.
All right, and just lastly, one of the things that these opposition political parties mention in their affidavit, or rather in their application to the Constitutional Court, is to compel Eskom to stop load shedding. Now, of course, in response, Andre Derita said that's not possible. This is something that has been a problem since 1998, something I think a lot of South Africans knew would form part of that response. So is it possible, really, or was it even necessary for the political parties to demand a stop to load shedding, something which they know cannot be stopped right now?
It is a huge problem. I mean, what is the alternative? And it has been going on for 25 odd years. So it is difficult to stop it, but if you've got continued corruption and you've got all these illegal tenders being granted, you're never going to stop it. So there has to be put a plan in place. And yes, he's correct. You can't just stop it overnight. I think we all want that. But we've got to put forward proposals. One of the proposals, well, privatize Eskom. Bring in people who can take over the debt. Now, what is happening? The debt allocation is made to pay the debt, and how is that going to solve the problem? If you don't root out the cause of that problem, and that's the corruption, the sabotage, and those people that were involved in literally bringing Eskom to its knees. So it is a long process, but one has to set in place the necessary proposals to kind of get to that particular point. But otherwise, it's just going to carry on, and you're going to just have corruption continuing all the time, and you're never going to solve the problem. But it isn't something that can stop overnight. And anybody who complains must, I believe, also put forward proposals. My proposal on a personal level is, well, let's look at privatizing. I think there have already been proposals from certain companies that were put forward. Those rejected. One asked why. If it's a private company, obviously it has to comply with regulations and the law, and can be made sure that it runs according to what the law says, not involved in activities as has been clearly highlighted, particularly by Mr. Derita.
All right, legal expert Mr. William Booth speaking to us there. Thank you very much for your time and expertise.